You need courage to face down the demons from the past. Because all the 50 murderers I worked with all killed a parental figment. You have to have the confidence that there's something really serious going on, and you can tell by whatever they've done, murder, obviously, serial killers, whatever it is, you can tell by the size of the aberration that something serious has gone wrong. These psychopaths, so-called, had all been born lovable, sociable, and non-violent. And something had gone wrong.
I remember saying to Bob at one time, I actually need to see the men. I need to see. So I went into C Wing, and basically C Wing was set up for the psychiatrically disturbed, dangerous, extremely violent men that Broadmoor couldn't handle. So they were too dangerous for Broadmoor.
So I went to see this chap. He was hallucinating 2-foot-sized images of his dad coming through the wall. So the officer said, we can't understand he's sleeping on the floor. And that he was saying, so I started talking about his dad. Instead of saying, I don't want to talk about my father now, he punched me. Boom. So in the first session, he says, well, part of me wants to kill, and as long as it wants to, I will let it. And I thought, just a minute. And then the rumors started going around that he was garrotting his pillow, preparatory to garrotting me. My most dangerous prisoner, no question, was Robert Maudsley. He was a serial killer, had been a serial killer, and had killed, I think, 4 times in prison or something like this. So I'm passing through the hospital on another occasion, and he's got these wire mesh things. We start chatting, and he says, if I had a friend who had this sort of problem, what would you do? I said, well, I would talk to your friend, you know, this sort of stuff. We knew what we were talking about. So I sat on the end of the bed near the door, and he's at that end. And he says, my hands are getting sweaty. I said, if you frighten me, I can't help you. We were making incredible progress. We were unpacking his appalling childhood. He eventually said, I see these things quite differently than a few months ago. The prison service saw him changing, shipped him out. The system couldn't take the idea that Maudsley was getting better.
What an indictment of the prison service. It spent the last 30 years creating special cages for these men that Bob was treating. Terrible for the prison officers to have to look after them in such terrible conditions. Terrible for the men themselves. Terrible for society. Total waste of money, total waste of resources, total indictment of an approach.
Here we go. We have finally got Dr. Bob on the channel and his wife, Sue, who is an author and educator. They are both campaigning for serious changes in prison policy, which dovetails exactly with what we've been saying on this channel, but they've got such vast experience. We've had Christopher Berry on, very popular, who does the interviews with serial killers. And these guys as well have sat down with people like Maudsley, Charles Bronson. Bob sat down with so many serial killers, 3 of them actually plotted to take his life. We're going to be getting to some of those stories. They've got a number of books that they've written, and all of the links for the books will be below this video in the description box if you're watching on YouTube, as will all of their socials if you want to follow them and get in touch. And I urge you to do so because they're on such an important mission. Bob was even ostracized because his work in the prison was doing so well, but the government shut it down, of course. Well, we'll start out with me reading a letter from Charles Bronson to Dr. Bob Johnson. A sad day to see you go, but I must admit I admire your principles. It's a rare sight to see a doctor stand up to this system. I first hit C-Wing 20 years ago. It's always been a unit for guys with problems, and it's basically worked. Even more so when you took over. You've done more in 5 years than the rest done in 25. In fact, 125. Dr. Cooper was a man who believed in drug control, whereas you believed in humanity, then trust. Your way obviously worked as you cut the violence. When I first hit C Unit, it was a violent struggle. Stabbings, cuttings on a regular basis. In fact, Brian Peake was murdered on there, and there were many hostage sieges. Your report says it all. Not once was the alarm bell used in 2 years. That's not just a remarkable achievement, it's in fact a miracle. No unit, wing, or asylum could ever give such an outstanding report. Your way worked. And all you've got for it is contempt, a kick in the face. Well said, Charles Bronson. Not just you, but every member of staff on the teachers too. And let's not forget the cons. It could have been a success without it could not have been a success without their cooperation. My spells on Sea Wing over the years have not been quite as successful, but that was down to my own personal problems, nothing to do with yourself. I know it will be a bad blow for many who will now be lost and have nothing more than a hell existence, a solitary survival, and all for trying to help themselves to be normal people. It won't surprise me if 1 or 2 may now be suicidal. All will feel betrayed and will feel bitter. Some will return to violence as their last resort. But you know better than anybody it's a sign of the times to put us in cages and forget us completely. Bob, for me, there's been nothing. I've worked at myself so hard. I wrote an award-winning book. I've even become a cartoonist. I've also found peace in my Islamic way of life. But in my last 3 years of multiple transfers, it's gradually driven me to feel more persecuted. I was driven mad in the 1970s and now experiencing the exact effects now. Lost, paranoid, confused, periods of depression, violent thoughts. As much as I've tried and put into changing my ways, the system seems destined to keep me isolated and on the move. Recently, I jumped on a doctor. I was overpowered. I am now facing another court case, no doubt more years. But nobody asks why Bronson takes hostages. Well, the answer is, Bob, I am a very effed up guy, desperate. It's the emptiness of never knowing when I will be moved, or where to. It's the desperation of life itself. Never seeing other cons, never seeing a TV. Having my family drift away, it's irreversible damage. All the system has done up to now is make my problems manifest, cause the violence. Take today, I arrived here at Full Sutton Seg Block on the 3rd of Jan. Told I'm only here for 28 days, now it's 33. So how do I tell my family to come and see me if I may move any hour? How do I settle? I'm just locked up in a cell. I don't take exercise. I don't take showers. I may use 2 or 3 words in a day, if that. There is no stability. There is nobody to trust. So my journey continues on until I'm too far gone to even trust good people. I made my wishes clear to you. I was hoping for a return to C Unit, as I felt I was ready for another chance. Lots of screws in various blocks also said it's high time I came off of this movement. You said we will move every 3 months. Well, I move every few weeks. All I can say is, Bob, and I speak for all the guys in the system, such as myself, guys who put the whole lot into your works, your leaving is a great loss to us all. I wish you well in your next project. You earned our respect and trust. Now we are back to square one. Respect, Charlie Bronson. P.S. Life is a bitch, and then you're born. There is no end, only a beginning. Oh my goodness, what a introduction, Bob, and huge shout out and thank you to Charles Bronson for that. By way of introduction, I know you want to give the backstory to that letter, but perhaps could you go way back and tell us how you were first introduced to Charles Bronson?
So no problem.
Thanks.
My background is I've always been interested in psychiatry. To me, it's the queen of the medical sciences and should be prominent right at the top. But in the course of my career, eventually I was able to deflect people from giving shock treatment. As a very junior, you do what you're told and you give people shock treatment. So when I was in a position to control that, I deflected people from it because I think it's a barbaric treatment and it should be outlawed. And unfortunately, the consultant I was working with at the time took this badly and blocked any further promotion in psychiatry. I was destined for a career in psychiatry, and he blocked it. There was no way forward. So I moved, as I could do then, into general practice. I had 3 children, and I moved into general practice and continued to study childhoods. I knew there was something there, I didn't know what it was. After 19 years, people saying, "You're doing all right, Dr. Bob, you're doing all right." And I think, well what do they know, But after a while, I was able to address the fear in one particular patient. And what was striking about that was she had emotional problems. She was a 40-year-old, grossly overweight, with blood pressure. And she came to see my practice nurse, and I said, "Would you be interested in working out some of the emotional background?" And she said, "Yes." So we talked together an hour a week for 6 months. And we weren't making a lot of progress. And so I cut it down. I cut it down to half an hour. I thought, well, I've got a lot of other stuff to do. And we got to minute 29, and she suddenly started opening up. I thought, oh, shit. So I had to decide what was important. And what was important for me was working out where this gross obesity came from, if it was an emotional cause. And so I went back to an hour. Very significant, because she must have concluded this man isn't going away. Mm-hmm. So then she said, when I was 6, did I ever tell you a story? When I was 6, my mother took me upstairs with the brothers and sisters, shut the bedroom door, pushed the furniture up against it, and my father came up the stairs with a hatchet, bashed holes in the door, said, "I'll bloody kill you all." I said, "No, you didn't." And it's the dog that didn't bark. For 9 months, she never told me, and that's because she couldn't tell herself. So in that 9 months, I'd built up such trust, I now see, that she was able to overcome the barriers that she'd built up for self-protection. Because we used to argue. She said, "The hatch is still there, you fool." I said, "No, it's not." "Yes, it is." "No, it's not." So arguing on that. And the reason it was so significant for me and why I was so confident was her father had died 4 years before. He was part of the family doctoring that I'd done. So it's a unique situation. And it took that long and that dedication. And also what I will say at this point is it was all on the NHS. I didn't charge her and she didn't pay me. Now, if there'd been a financial motive, either benefit to me or cost to her, it would have interfered. But it was just purely clinical research, which is very difficult to obtain these days, but it breaks. So then I thought, wow, what happens is that the person themselves blocks the one crucial event and they can't describe it. And later, I dealt 1 or 2 other patients with it, and there was one woman who I was talking to her, and at that time I had a quite elaborate phrase. I said, "Hello, parent, I'm terrified of you. I don't need to be, I'm an adult." So she said, I said, "An empty chair, sit, I can't remember, mum or dad, sit your mum there." And she turned to me and she said, "Oh," she repeated it verbatim to me, there. And then instantaneous, bonk, gone. In the presence or the fear of one parent or other. And that's the key. So what you have to do is to establish a powerful bond, a trustworthy bond. Because if you're weak, then the abuser will eat you for breakfast. If you're strong, you'll just repeat the abuse, unless they can trust you. You have to have the confidence that there's something really serious going on, and you can tell by whatever they've done, murder, obviously, serial killers, whatever it is, you can tell by the size of the aberration that something serious has gone wrong. Because what I learned in Parkhurst was that these psychopaths, so-called, had all been born lovable, sociable, and non-violent. And something, which they couldn't tell you, had gone wrong. And eventually they could tell you.
That was actually the model that Bob was taking into
I took
Parkhurst.
that model into
But he
Parkhurst.
didn't actually know it would work. But it was the model he was absolutely convinced would work, but we didn't know, and I didn't know. And I remember when I remember saying to you, well, if your model's right, it'll work in Parkhurst. It'll work with the most dangerous, the most severe, the most damaged people. So,
If it works there, it should work anywhere.
And it'll work, yeah. And if it works in Parkhurst, it'll work anywhere.
Did you have any fears of Bob working with people who murdered people?
Yes, I did. I mean, I've written about my fears in the book and how I approached it, and how I managed to be all right with it somehow. And basically, I remember saying to Bob at one time, I actually need to see the men. I need to see.
What's happening?
I actually need to see
how it
the men,
works.
so I can trust that what Bob's doing is okay, because Bob knew he could trust himself, and he knew his model, but I didn't. So I did go into the prison and talk to some of the men and see them. And I described what I saw.
I think at this point we have to say why I went to Parkhurst in the first place.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have gone if Sue's college friend hadn't married the then governor. John Marriott was the youngest governor of the flagship prison, which Parkhurst was in those days. He was the youngest governor, and he was liberal. And we visited in February of 91, family friends. He says, come down, we've moved to Isle of Wight, come and have a look. So I thought, well, if we don't go, it's back and beyond, we'll never go. So we went, and over the weekend, he said to me, he said, well, we're looking for a psychiatrist. I thought, yeah, well, you would. Who wants to work in a dungeon? But he was conversing with his brother-in-law and other people there, and he sounded liberal. So I thought, well, having decided never to work in a large institution because they're toxic, I thought, well, I'll make an exception if I know the man at the top. So when they start yanking my chain, I can say, John, come and sort, you know. So that's how we went.
Well, it isn't exactly how we went, because Bob went down to see the prison and John and the prisoners, and then he rang me up, and I was working at the university in Manchester then, and he rang me up in my office there, and he said, I think I might have to work here. And I thought, will you come and see, you see? So I thought, yeah, I mean, Bob never says an idle word. So I knew it was serious, he really would. And so I went down and I went into C Wing, and saw the men.
When you say the men, what class of prisoner were they? What categories and what crimes?
They were all men. Basically, C Wing was set up for the psychiatrically disturbed, dangerous, extremely violent men that Broadmoor couldn't handle. So they were too dangerous for Broadmoor.
Wow.
So
It had been going about 5 years then.
Yeah.
And it followed some serious riots in Manchester in the 80s, early 80s, and they thought it's a nice idea. We'll take the ringleaders out so that to cut the risk of and put the ringleaders in the special units. So this was I think there were 4 or 5 special units at that time around the country, Hull and various places, and Parkhurst was the top of the pile.
So was Alan Lord in there then? Because we had him on. He was one of the Strange Ways rioters.
No.
Was this before that?
no,
was
they
probably
had
before them. This is
they
91.
were all deemed psychiatric problems.
The qualifications for admission were...
I mean, I described the drugs they were on when we first went in, and they were just lines of sort of
Zombies.
Yeah, I mean, I went down...
really, the misery was just palpable. The misery and the sort of threat. It was a bit like they were so guarded. It was just like an explosion could happen any minute, but most of the time it was just bored misery. But what did happen on that occasion, and I still wonder whether I'd have made a different decision if this hadn't happened. We were walking down the wing, and I was sort of hanging back, sort of looking round, and this young man clattered down from the wands, down the metal staircase. He wore a blue jumper and sunglasses, I remember. He took his sunglasses off, walked straight up to me.
Past the governor.
Past all these others. Took his sunglasses off and said, "Will you let him come?"
Incredible.
Will you let him come? And I just thought the appeal was just so... I just...
See, what happened
I
was,
just sort of slightly nodded, and he was satisfied, and he went back up the... And that's... and I just... So, a year later, I took an early retirement deal from the university and came back to join Bob.
Because what I'd done is in the February went down and we had this chat, and then I visited the 1st of May. I'd promised to visit John's prison in Lewis when he was governor there, and I never got round to it. But I thought, all right, then I'll go. So I went to the 1st of May, and they were just shuffling like the backwards of the psychiatric wing when I did my training, or like general practice patients. I thought, these aren't people with horns.
Not quite like...
They haven't got a tail. I'll come back again. So I came back again, and then rang Sue and said, I might have to work here.
Did you think I'd say no?
No, of course not.
See, there you go.
No, I mean,
No.
I'd made this breakthrough, as I thought, that the person in front of you is the main problem. They have all the problems of the symptoms and so on, violence and stuff, but they've got the barrier, and until you remove the barrier, you're not going to get anywhere.
So you're going in to test this out. What was your initial challenges?
Well, it was very interesting. One of the challenges with the staff, the officers, right? So I go in there and I said, I want to be called Bob. Oh, no, you're Dr. Johnson. You're Dr. Johnson. I said, no, I'm not. Because one of the problems is the parental figment, or the parental image from the past was the one where all the damage is. So I'm not an authority. I'm an emotional plumber. I'm on their level, helping them to deal with. Sometimes I couldn't make that bridge, but where I could, that's what I was. I was looking at the problem with them, not at them or putting them down. I was trying to grow them up emotionally. So there was a big discussion about that. I said, oh, all right, Dr. Bob. So they said, all right, Dr. Bob. So we compromised. And what's really curious is in the interview with my star prisoner, Lenny, he said, if you'd call yourself Dr. Johnson, I'd have naught to do with you. So it was confirmed. But I mean, that's right. I'm not solving the problems. I'm giving them a treatment so they can solve it. And it's like any educator anywhere. I can do maths, I can do this, I can do that. But unless I transfer the skill, you haven't done anything. So back to the first week. I started on July the 1st. It was a Monday, 1991. And by Thursday, I'd interviewed all the prisoners on C Wing, which is my only technical job. I'd interviewed them all the ones that agreed to see me, because I only saw them by consent. The officer said, shall we send them in? Shall we say, no. I said, if they don't consent, I don't want to see them. If they consent or not, that's up to them. So I got my notes and I'd finished on the Thursday. And on the Friday, the mischievous governor, John Marriott, said, right, now, Friday morning, I want you to go to the SEG and see Charlie Bronson. Nothing to do with me. Quite a different area of the prison. Not my responsibility at all. I don't see. I don't know what was in his mind. Well, I do. I'll come on to that. So there was a table which wasn't quite wide enough in the event, a large room, and a very muscular officer looking through the glass door. I'll be in if there's any trouble. I thought, fun chance. So we're chatting on, and I got on very well with Charlie until right at the end, or towards the end, I put a foot wrong. Can't remember quite what it was. It was something to do with, I think he said he had some sort of epilepsy, and I said I didn't take a lot of notice of it. So he reached across, grabbed my entire notes. These are my notes, he said. I said, just the top two, Charlie. So he peeled off the top two, handed my week's work, handed it back to me, and then shredded it up into postage-sized things. He says that in one of his letters. It's astonishing. And the upshot from that was, 10 years or so later, his solicitor said, could I have the references when you first examined him? I said, well, they're all in a waste paper basket on the what I did then with Charlie was establish him as an equal in that sense, and somebody who could help him.
I wrote about that incident in the book, and how scared I actually was when I realised that Bob had been sent in to sit with Charlie on his own without any Anyway, I wrote about it and what happened. So years later, when I finished writing the book, I sent a draft to Charlie because I wanted to see what he thought about it. But I was a bit nervous because I thought he might not like what I'd written or anything. Anyway, his response absolutely staggered me. And he wrote quite a few letters back to me. And one of the things he said was that we inside don't often think of those over the walls and how they're suffering. And, he said it's that perspective, he said, is really important. And, I wish I'd brought the letters in because I could have read out some of those. But and then he's written a foreword to the book.
Fantastic.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. And how he's retained his humanity and also empathy, because he said it was realistic what I was writing about, my fears. Bob could have come home in a body bag, he said. Because he knew. And really important to me that the men, as it were, could relate to what I'd written. And Charlie showed me they could.
Which leads to my next point then. So we have a lot of viewers in America. And in America, if you're going to access the highest security, most dangerous prisoners, it's like when Clarice Starling first meets Hannibal Lecter. They're behind a plexiglass screen. They can't access you. You said you're going and sitting down in a room with them with no guard?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not having people eavesdrop on confidential stuff. No.
But what about the risk to yourself of doing that? You're going into an unknown.
Well, it's very curious. Obviously, I'm a general practitioner, some experience in psychiatry. I'm going in there. And after about 12 or 18 months, you learn to read violence. There's not, whatever it's going to be, and you learn to read it. And my most dangerous prisoner, no question, was Robert Maudsley. And I saw him on my first trip round. He was in a single cell, and he was a gaunt, Moses-type figure, long hair, miserable as sin.
Could you explain to the viewers what Mausley's crimes were?
Robert Maudsley was, in fact, at that time, probably the most dangerous prisoner in the prison system. He was a serial killer, had been a serial killer, and had killed, I think, 4 times in prison or something like this, and no understanding either on his part or on the system. So I noted him. He was actually in Parkhurst when I first went in 91, and he was on the hospital wing. He wasn't in C wing.
But at that time, you weren't allowed to. You couldn't go in and sit with him. at all.
I spent. It was unusual for me. I
Fortunately.
spent a diplomatic campaign with the chief medical officer. So I had a coffee morning with him every morning, and gradually I was working to get his permission to see Robert Maudsley.
So it's a great ambition.
And I thought, well, give it a go. If I can reach him, I've got to reach him. And so I'm passing through the hospital on another occasion, and he's got these wire mesh things. And we start chatting, and he says, if I had a friend who had this sort of problem, what would you do? I said, well, I would talk to your friend, this sort of stuff. We knew what we were talking about it. And I said, would you be interested? And he said, well, my friend probably would be interested, this sort of thing. So that was the background to it. Then I got to the chief medical officer's permission. And I sat, the prison cell was, 10 feet by 6, something like that, and the bed's there and the door's here. So I sat on the end of the bed near the door, and he's at that end. And he says, my hands are getting sweaty. I said, if you frighten me, I can't help you. Now, that was a breakthrough for me. I was probably 18 months there, because it meant I had confidence on my behalf that I had something to offer and it could help him. So he calmed down. But that was the case. I said, I'm near the door. I'm out of the door before you can get off your bed, and so he went. And he was making sterling progress. We'd probably get on to him, but we were making incredible progress. We were unpacking his appalling childhood.
How did you break the ice with him then?
What you do is you, as it were, lay things out on the table, see which way they pick up. And he used to get very agitated. He said, I think he had something like sort of, I have a protector and he's coming in now, he's getting, so I said, I'd back off. And we got it gently. And do you want me to come again? All by consent. Do you want me to come again? All right then. And we did, I think, monthly to begin with, and then gradually more. And I've got some notes from him. And he eventually said, I see these things quite differently than a few months ago.
So you build a bond.
Yes.
And then you get them jointly, you and him, to examine the trauma. Is that how it works?
Yeah. What happens is they put the trauma in a box.
Yeah.
And they're the only people who can open the box. Now, if they open the box prematurely, that's the end of them. They're dead. They're dead. So they don't open the box. Now, my message to them, the box is empty, The box is empty, The box is empty. Do they trust you? Do they believe you? Oh, well, that wasn't so bad. That wasn't bad. Whoo! If you can open the box and blow it all away, it goes 100%. But there's all these, exactly. There's a whole lot of stuff in between. And it's a skill. You go in there and you read the signs that they're pushing you back. So you go back and you put it into third person, or you dilute the message. But basically, what I want them to do is to, and I've developed it more since, is to say, you can't do that anymore. I'm an adult, whatever it was. I'm not interested in what it was. You can't do that anymore. I'm an adult. And they don't believe that. They do not believe that things have changed from the age of 2 or the age of 3 or whatever it was. They do not believe it. I mean, so that's an insight on my part that I have to convey to them. So I have to say, you're a grown lad. There's only 2 people in the room. What's happening? Are you frightened? Yes, I am, yes. Well, why? There's only 2 of us here. Really? Try it. And as they try it and then see the benefit, they're opening the box a little bit, and then they see that it's safe to open the box. And I'm supporting them all the time. In fact, the dialogue with Lenny, which is in my book, the dialogue with Lenny says, yes, well, that's because you're here. So I said, well, what role am I playing? What am I doing here? You're giving me. And I say moral support. And he says, power, we overlap. But he's right. I'm giving him power. I'm empowering him. Well, I'm revealing his adult power, really. I'm not giving it. He's an adult and he has the power, but I'm insisting that he has, and I'm insisting that he looks at it. And so in that video, which is available on the web, the first 11 minutes that I was able to video Lenny, you can see him changing. So I say, right, if your mother's over there, what would you say? I don't tell him what to say. Very crucial. What do you say? He said, well, mother, I'm an adult and you can't batter me anymore. So I say, because I'm cheeky, do you believe that? And he says, partly. For goodness sake. Now that's in a nutshell. A, he knows what he should be able to do. B, he knows he can't do it. And he's telling me a really humiliating thing. Now, in order for him to do that, he has to trust me implicitly, trust me that I'm not going to say, oh, or mock him or anything, but I'm there and I'm showing him. So I chide him, and later on in the same interview, right, see, Mum's there, what are you going to do? Oh, sure, I will, I'll tell her. And he winds himself up. Now, that's what you need. You need courage to face down the demons from the past. Because all the 50 murderers I worked with all killed a parental figment. They didn't. People say, first of all, you ask them, and they have no idea. They give guff. Oh, well, the red mist came down. Oh, well, he had it coming. No, rubbish. It's a parental figment or somebody who stands in lieu of a parental figment.
Somebody who abused them.
Somebody who's either did the abusing or is exposing them to the abuse again, whatever it is. I mean, if you go on to Harold Shipman eventually, if I'd had a chance to poke him about, I would find that somewhere in his past, he was terrified of a strong female figure. So therefore, his remedy was to kill strong female figures. That's how the thing was manifesting itself, and how it would stop manifesting itself if I'd said, look, what you do with these strong friends, you just hold your hand and say, go away. I'm an adult. You can't do that anymore. I don't know what it was. And you can't be specific what it was. Sometimes it's something that other people wouldn't notice. But the child thinks this is the end. And they close down. I've recently called it sort of an emotional anaphylactic shock. It's like an allergy. You go thunk. And you're, just as your antibodies attack you, when you have anaphylaxis to some allergen, this is a self-defense mechanism that's gone wrong. You go crunch, and your frontal lobes go offline, your speech center goes offline, you cannot talk, you cannot think, you cannot verbalize. And it's the verbalizing that does it. I've got this book out now called Verbal Physiotherapy, which you go in and say, how much can you manage? Oh, well, I can manage a bit, fine. Do you think they should do this? You put it in gentle terms, and then you gradually, so that you get to the stage with Lenny. I mean, it was wonderful because he changed. I started in July. I managed to get around John Marriott, the governor, to take the video camera in September, and by November, Lenny was out the other side. I said, okay, and I've got dialogue of the November the 11th interview. I say, okay, Lenny, your mother's coming across to hit you. What are you going to say? Now, if I'd said that to begin with, he could well have exploded, could have stopped me violently or whatever, but he had to stop the conversation. But so when I'm confident, so I said, okay, Lenny, your mother's coming across. What are you going to say? Because I'm a nice middle-class chap, and I expect him to say, I wouldn't say anything. I just hold her hand. Total confidence. You can't do that anymore, Mum. I'm an adult. Reality. And the whole thing's gone. His violence has gone. His dis-ease, his unease has gone. He's calm, he's collected, and he's through.
And he's off all the psychiatric drugs he was on.
Wow.
In February, I started...
Violence goes down, the drugs go down.
I started working in July. In the February, he tried to come off this fortnightly injection. So when I came in, I said, so what medication are you on? I'm on this injection. Don't take it off, doctor. No, I took that off in February. Oh, I'm terrible. No, don't stop that. Oh. So I said, Charlie, you're in charge. Whatever you say, I'll keep prescribing it until you agree to come off. So it came off. And there's a contrast. You see the video in September, and he's just a little bit slurred. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then November, it's gone. He stopped the drugs, stopped everything.
So, with the time it takes to bond, for example, with Maudsley,
Right.
how do you know the bond is established enough to start looking at the box together?
You send out little feelers.
Feelers.
Little feelers, you say. So what would you say if somebody else did something or other? Put it in third person. You get skilled at bringing up little bits, and you watch how he reacts. And if he buys a bit, I mean, he's actually very, very good. I mean, I think I've got a bit of his dialogue here.
Yeah, give us an example. That'd be great.
It's interesting. I needed to see, so I sat and looked at some of the videos, and I described what I actually saw as, and an amazingly intense experience.
Yeah.
It's truth, trust, and consent. That was the sort of soup in which it all swam. If that wasn't there, they couldn't even begin to start nibbling away at it. And yeah.
I mean, for example, here, I've numbered the lines and I've just taken them fairly at random because I don't want to breach clinical confidentiality, but these are in his favour, so I justify that. So here, line 15. Hang on there, though, Bob. We're still going too fast. He's warning me, you see. Because what you want you to do, you're wanting to get into the room and feel the emotions of the child wanting to do that. But we realize there are certain hazards in actually doing that. But how will we still get there, right? So he sees how going too fast has riled him up. And yet that's very clear what we're about. And he knows he can't yet do it.
He's engaged.
See, we're on a joint project. So here's line 23. Maudsley, it's going well. Me, yes, it is, isn't it? It's going well, he says. And then line 29. This is incredible, this one. I'm able to talk about things a lot more things today than I was able to, 6 or 9 months ago. That's gold. Wow. That's solid gold. And then line 36, Dr. Bob. What I say is I get the rational mind to sort out the irrational mind. And that's basically today's reality sorting out yesterday's or childhood reality. Now, that's an intellectual challenge. It's a rational challenge. And he buys it. He buys it. And this is line 39. He says, and I think that's quite good, quite powerful, Bob, in terms of it's inaudible, that bit. You can turn around and say, okay, quite a lot of bad things have happened to us, and we've done quite a lot of bad things, bad things, etc. But at the end of the day, this is incredible. You should come clean with our consciousness and our spirit and our souls to the extent we can turn around and say, okay, let's be reborn again and go through all the experiences we've done out the other end, right at the end. And be satisfied, like you're saying, Bob, like that there are no blocks, that we don't turn around and say, oh, well, that period was particularly nasty, let's forget about it. Now, that's him summarizing it.
Wow.
You can see how it works.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what happened was that the prison service saw him changing, shipped him out. Yes.
He's now in a glass cage.
He said to me, the story was that he was going on a 12-week holiday and they'd bring him back. But they lied. They had no intention of bringing him back.
So the trust is shattered at that point, is it?
Well, no. I mean, I'd treat him now. I'd treat him today. But the system couldn't take the idea that Maudsley was getting better. And now he's in a glass cage in Wakefield, 6 officers on lock.
And is he able to communicate with you through the mail?
He, not with me, but I think his brother gets in touch. And I'm in contact with his nephew, Gavin, and we have a joint wish for a documentary to uncover all this, because I've got 4 hours of audio 4 hours of audio of my sessions, which I've just taken an extract from. And I was moving on to video with his consent. I hadn't got there. But one of the audio recorders said, well, you can see the lens cap is on, so there's no video, but the little red lights showing that comes out. And he agreed. I mean, I'm not moving without consent. I mean, that was absolutely rock solid. And looking back, what the consent does is to empower them. It's what I would call now agency. They've never been asked permission before. They've been said, do this, do that, do the other. Prisons, of course, are doing that all the time. Prison destroys agency. And unless they've got agency, they can't stop doing bad things. But once they've got agency, I don't need that. I don't need the violence. I don't need the addiction. I don't need whatever it is. Once they've got the agency. And so what's happened with the child trauma, the child abuse, the childhood neglect, whichever way you want to put it, is lack of agency in the adult. Lack of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-empowerment. They don't believe it. They've never been taken seriously. I mean, I'm an important doctor, lots of qualifications, and I'm taking them seriously. I'm sitting there and say, you want to come and see me? No. Fine, that's all right. One walked around for 6 months. You coming to see me? No. Fat chance. And what doctors normally do is say, treatment resistant, patient refuses to comply with the medical rules. No, nothing. And he wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And then I'll go and see him. You come to see me again? Somebody see me? Yes. What? So he came every week and he revealed the most gross abuse. His father threw him out of the window and but he stuck to it, and he came every week, and we started. And then later, this chap I'm talking about now, he said, "If I hadn't been talking to you, I'd have killed 3 times on this wing." And he'd got a history of killing in the prison before. And I said, 3 corpses? No, only 1. And there was this little squid of a prisoner. I shouldn't call him that, but he didn't, because his anger against his father, which would have come out in his murderousness, had gone. He'd opened the box, and the box was now empty.
But what an indictment of the prison service. It spent the last 30 years creating special cages for these men that Bob was treating. And waste of resources, waste of...
That must be £500,000 a year, six officers unlocked.
Terrible for the prison officers that have to look after them in such terrible conditions. Terrible for the men themselves. Terrible for society. Total waste of money, total waste of resources, total indictment of an approach. And
I would go and sit in with Maudsley today.
So people who are watching this then, who trust the government and trust the system, are perhaps wondering at this point, what would the motive be if you were getting a serial killer to not be violent and not have to need medication and become a more peaceful person? What would the motive be for the system to take that person away from you and then for his tendencies to flare back up, for example?
I'm surmising, but sort of jealousy in a way. They've got the systems for dealing with dangerous people, so they have to keep the dangerous bit sort of macho on the part of some of the members of the government. But I also have to say that the psychiatrists are dead against anything that cures a psychopath.
Why is that?
Well, there was a prison inspector's report, Her Majesty's Inspector of Prisons, came round, and lots of preparation in Parkhurst, October 94. And the psychiatrist associated with that agreed to see me on the Wednesday, pulled me out of a meeting on the Tuesday, pulled rank, and said, the idea is doing any good. It's totally anecdotal. Right? And the prison's inspector report came out, and I was the only person named, and I was slagged off brutally. And other parts of the report said the prisoners on C Wing is very good here. We're getting a good time. We can do all these things. Dr. Johnson has to be reprimanded for doing A, B, and C. He has to be put on a contract and all this sort of stuff. And later, I was looking through the hospital library, and this man had written this book on psychopaths. And even later, again, when the Royal College of Psychiatry was formed in 1973, he had agitated for a forensic branch, which was later established, on the basis that psychopaths are totally incurable. And here they were changing. If you looked around, the fact is that in the prison, if somebody's violent or threatened violence, you ring the alarm bell. And because C Wing was a special unit and they had research, they sent the psychologist over every month to, say, document what had happened. So she wrote down assaults, 3 alarm bells, diddly. And then she got bored because the last 3 years, there were no alarm bells. On average, there were 20 alarm bells every year. And she said, oh, well, I'm bothered coming over. But that proves... if you take the waiting list control, which is what it is, 7 years, there's 20 alarm bells every year. And the last 3 years, 0. None. This is a maximum security wing, people too dangerous for Broadmoor, and no violence. So you have to have a particularly blind government and policy and Home Secretary to see that. But
I was just going to say that... the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, where it identifies personality and psychopathic disorders, I think they call it disorder of personality that they're born with. So this is a medicalisation of the born evil mantra. And so the two get colluded. Collusion. There's a collusion. They reinforce one another, and I must say as well, there's a sort of popular idea that there are certain categories of person that are just born evil, and what can you do? What we found, really, that there are things you can do. That people are born sociable, lovable, non-violent. Tiny babies. They're not born with a personality disorder.
Jump in there. As a doctor, you go into a situation and you try very, 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 very hard to change people, and they say, get lost. You get nowhere at all. You say, well, that's not my fault. It's their fault. In fact, when we were medical students, it was a joke that the doctor would make the diagnosed psychopath when his treatment wasn't working. And that's writ large. So you can understand the frustration of a well-intentioned doctor going in there, going through the front door, and the person is blocking, as I've described. You can access it by going through the side door, but you cannot do it the front door. You say, well, what was your childhood like? Lovely. It was a lovely childhood. But underneath, that's because they're not telling themselves. Like this woman, I was 9 months talking about childhood, and she never mentioned the one significant thing. And that was my breakthrough. The fact is that the lesion, the pathology, is the blockage. I mean, what happened 20, 50, or in one case, 80 years ago? One of my patients was 82. What happened 80 years ago should have faded, but it hasn't because it's never been processed. And the reason it's not been processed, it was too frightening. Too frightened to think about unaided. Now that's the key, unaided. So my task was to show I'm here, I understand, I'm not frightened of your dad or your mum, or I'm not frightened of what happened, and I'm not going to abuse you, I'm not going to, all these things. And if you give them the aid, in that sense, emotional support, then they open up. And underneath you find that we're actually a social species. Homo sapiens exists and is not extinct so far because they have cooperate, they work together and they plan together.
So you're saying then, out of all of your cases, none of them were born evil. They were going after parental figments or people who'd abused them. It was all to do with trauma. There wasn't just anyone purely born evil, had a great upbringing by the parents, but then turned into a serial killer.
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. It's not possible. It's not possible to do that. And one of the ones that was particularly instructive, and also a very dangerous man, I call him Alec.
Oh, yeah.
And I call him Alec. And he came in, he was 24 when he first came in. And he didn't want to come to Sea Wing. He'd heard about the murder there, and it was a very dangerous place. He wasn't going to go to Sea Wing. And as luck would have it, he was seen in reception by a prison officer I'd had a lot of talk with about what I was working at. And I call him Colin, the officer, and he understood the way I worked. And so he said, it's by consent. This is maximum security prison. He's coming in. Take me to the seg unit. Take me to the solitary confinement block. Oh, says Alec, I'm not going in there. And he would have come in the unit and been off again and done something to insist, because that's what they do. I mean, they know how the system works. So they've punched an officer or something like that and have got himself. So he was persuaded to come in. And he said, you don't have to come and talk if you don't want to. Now that is revolutionary. And Colin had learned that from my technique. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. He told him this. So that reassured Alec that it would be fine. So when he first comes in, unfortunately by that time, this is 18 months into my time there, I'm videotaping everybody who will agree. So all of Alec's sessions with me are all on videotape. So in the first session, very revealing. He says, well, I made no secret of the fact I'm going to kill again in prison. He'd already killed in prison. I'm going to kill again in prison, and part of me wants to kill. And as long as it wants to, I will let it. I will kill every 2 years. When you're falling asleep, you plan your next holiday. When I'm falling asleep, I plan my next murder. And they'll move me on. And so 2 years later, I'll kill somebody else. I'll kill again, and kill again, and kill again. I'm not going to stop that. Part of me wants to do it, I will let it. So I discussed his father with him. Nothing. Discussed his mother. Nothing. Ding, 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 ding. You're coming next week? Oh, all right. Oh, all right. So gradually, about sort of 12 months in, I went too far. I said, well, what about your mother? So he stopped coming. It was all by appointment, right? I was very proud of that. You've got a maximum security wing. They can't go anywhere else. I make an appointment, 11 o'clock. There's nowhere else to go. Or they don't make the appointment. So he stopped making appointments. So that was his consent, his agency to do that. And I thought, just a minute. And then the rumors started going around that he was garroting his pillow, preparatory to garroting me. So what his plan was, so they said, was that he would suddenly start saying, yes, I'll come and see you again. And as I turned to put my video camera on, which he knew I would do, he would garrote me. So I didn't like the sound of that, as you can imagine. And so I asked around, we had a meeting in the morning of all the admin heads, and I asked the chief probation officer, how serious should I take it? Very seriously, he said. So I went to see the governor. Unfortunately, it was the deputy governor then, not John Marriott. It was deputy governor, who had more agency in a sense. He had more imagination. So I said, I don't even like walking down the wing to get myself a cup of tea. Something has to be done. He said, oh, well, I've got a Cat A van going out next week. I'll ship him out next week. I said, not next week. He was winding me up because of what he did. And not next week, now. So he was as good as his word. That was the Tuesday. He went in on Tuesday evening because he was on the governor, so he goes, and he shifted him out, put him in the solitary confinement block, and said to him, Dr. Johnson will come and see you in the morning. He will report to me, and I will decide what happens next. Now the bureaucracy with Sea Wing admissions was just horrendous, and he was just cutting all the red tape. So the next Wednesday morning, the meeting of the admins, he called me over. He told me they'd done this, and if you go and see him, then you report to me. And so I went to see him. No, I didn't. I went to the Sea Wing in my office, doing my papers and stuff, and there's a knock on the door, and 3 prisoners came in and said, he should really be back here, you know. One chap was in his 50s. He said, I see myself as 20 years ago. And if he goes through the rest of his life sentence having threatened to kill a psychiatrist, it'll be hell. So I said, oh, yeah, he should really come back. But there was no arm twisting. It was just the three of them. These are unempathetic psychopaths who aren't interested in anything. They were concerned about him. So I cleared up my paperwork and went to the sec unit, and I got two robust officers either side. And what happens is you open the door, and they hear the doors open. They rush out and grab you, you see. So it's like they sort of stood back. I opened the door, and they're sitting on the cell bed, crestful eyes. So I went and sat next to him. He said, I shouldn't have done that. I need to be back in the C wing. So I said, well, I'll report to the deputy governor and he will decide whether to come back or not. So I did, and he did. And then we continued. Probably 6-9 months later, he reports a visit of his mother, and I've put the dialogue in the book. It's just astonishing. His mother says, according to him, you've changed. There's a seriousness in your face now. Not all teenager anymore. I have to respect you more. I have to admit that I've been too close and I've mothered you too much and this sort of stuff, so it's partly my fault. But you're different. I can get on with my life now. And Alec himself said, I've given up violence. I don't need violence anymore. Oh, if somebody attacks me, I would defend myself, but I'm not planning anymore. So I've saved a death every 2 years.
Wow.
And in fact, I met Lord Ramsbottom, the ex-prison inspector, at a House of Lords meeting one time. And I said, I'm writing this book. I'm thinking of writing a book in which I claim to have saved over a dozen lives. He said, I'm sure you have. But unfortunately, he wasn't in office anymore, and the support I've had from the establishment is zero.
Well, the policy is opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You just lock them up, and
It's a popular thing. Yeah.
So there were two other occasions when killers planned to kill you?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. One of them was. I don't know how to describe him. I was going to say ill-disciplined, most of them were, but anyway, he was particularly ill-disciplined. And I was talking to him, and I came in from lunch break one time, and they said, oh, this chap's really going for you now. He said, he's going to pull you from limb to limb. He says, nobody talks to my mum like that. I'm going to. So the officers were delighted. This was very early on. I was this about sort of 2 or 3 months. So we had to meet in the main prison wing office. And fortunately, the table was much wider. And I sat this side. And sitting next to him was this woman officer. I said, you're sitting next to him. What? Well, I mean, she knew there was absolutely no threat to her. I didn't know that. I was totally new to it. And so they didn't really take his threat seriously, but it sounded bad. He was going to pull me limb from limb, and so we talked about it then. And he actually started coming to see me again after that. But that was one threat.
What was in his box then?
Oh, we never really opened it actually. And he's one of the tragedies because even though I was a psychiatrist on the special unit, there was lots of machinations in the background. And at one stage, he was shipped out into the hospital wing, which I wouldn't have approved of if I'd been consulted, but he was shipped out to the hospital wing. So I went to visit him there. And he didn't want to see me. So the relationship had broken. And he ended in tragedy because he actually managed to hang himself.
Oh, dear. Mm-hmm.
So we never really got any further with him. And in fact, I think possibly his suicide in the hospital wing spooked the chief medical officer, broke him.
Well, it's terribly difficult.
He should never have gone out. But I mean, I didn't have the authority. I mean, I'm the doctor on the wing, but that was part of the trouble. They were sort of macho against him, the middle management, the upper management, and they shipped him out. They shouldn't have shipped him out, but I tried. I went over to visit him, and I couldn't establish a relationship then.
Who was the third death threat from?
The third one's a chap with long hair. I can't remember the details of that, but he threatened to kill me, or and we never really started with him, and that was the reason and he was cleaning in the wing down there, and they told me about it. The officer, and I had to go past him to get through the door. They said, "You can go this way. You can go the back way." I said, "No." I went along. He said, "Come on." He said, "I don't want to talk to you." I said, "Fine." That's fine. I don't have nothing to do with it. Fine. And then they shipped him out, and he wrote, "Yes, I was abused, but I didn't tell you about it." And that, again, was fairly early on. My technique wasn't as sound, and the support wasn't there. But they are in charge. It's their box. They open it or they don't open it. And if they don't open it, it remains closed. And it remains closed for 80 years, or as long as they're out there. And it's not surprising in some circumstances quite how tight that box is, because they say to themselves, keep the box shut and you'll live. Open it and you're dead. And I said, no, you're not. Yes, you are. No, yeah. Ah! It's empty. But to get there, well, it's building up a relationship. It's building up a bond. It's building up a very powerful. And I mean, I succeeded in quite enough cases. I didn't succeed in all cases. I sometimes, well, I know the fact is that if the rest of the staff had all been like Colin, for example, and knew what I was doing and supported it and said, well, it's up to you. Now, you can't do that in a prison normally. We're telling you what to do. You'll have your meal now. You won't have your meal now, whatever it's going to be. And that's coercion. And of course, coercion is the opposite of what you need. You need consent. You need to increase the agency.
So when these death threats came to light, were you asking Bob, maybe we should rethink your occupation?
No, I never did that. I sometimes got really cross and stomped around a bit. And
what was the situation that made you the most cross?
Well, the first one with Charlie, actually, I think, because I just thought that was unnecessary peril. And I remember, I mean, I described my reactions to that in the book, but the one when a prison officer rang up in the middle of the night, and I answered the phone, and he said, would you tell Dr. Bob to watch his back tomorrow, because, H, I think I call him. I call him in the book, is threatening to kill him. And that really worried me. So I woke up Bob had gone to sleep. And he said, there's nothing to do now, I'll sort it in the morning, and went back to sleep. And then, you see, I just stomp around the kitchen, and...
that was Alec, by the way.
Yes.
That was Alec.
Yeah, that was. And I was sort of more cross with the officers, because I thought, well, I knew by then the system a bit, and if this had happened and they knew about it, then the man should have just instantly been put on good order and discipline, goad or whatever they call it, and it'd have been shipped off. But I think, I mean, again, it's the early days that were the most perilous from the men's point of view. Later on, it was from the officers, and then later on, it was from the Home Office, and later on, it was from psychiatrists. So we had loads of different perils, but looking back, the men actually were the least of it, really, because they could recognise the lack of bullshit in Bob, and that's it protected him quite a lot.
That's true.
And they understood that, and they
Yeah, and
they have a bullshit meter, you know,
Yeah.
incredibly well attuned somehow. But
Charlie Manson.
yeah, so I was really angry with the officers, I suppose. I don't know. It was just, you know, why am I in this situation, being woken up at night? Oh, bah, bah, bah. And stamping around the kitchen. I remember making hot milk for myself and grating my knuckles and all sorts of stuff. And being...
But
but you weren't. You thought you could sort it, you see, but I didn't have the control of sorting it. I was just the recipient of it. So it was...
well, I could evaluate the things.
You
that
could
they were-
evaluate
yeah.
it. And I trusted you could sort it, but
And you take the episode.
you might not.
To take the episode with Alec, for example, I go into the office and the three prisoners come through. And one of them, in fact, it was the chap with the blue jumper. He was the Baron on the wing. He said he'd have to get past me. And I thought, well, that wouldn't be terribly difficult. But I mean, you know, so there was a lot of forces on my side in the prisoners, and eventually they said, oh, don't tell me about your sex abuse. Go and tell Dr. Bob. What's the matter with you, sort of thing. So that was a very useful thing.
But I made the mistake once of sort of picking up a book about, you know, notorious true crime prisoners or whatever, and some of the faces I recognised leaping off the pages.
Which ones did you recognise?
Oh, yeah. And there were some gruesome murders they were describing.
I should say that John Marriott was exceptional, no question at all.
Yeah.
And had he not been there, in fact, Sue says the dedication.
I've dedicated the book to John.
The fact is,
he was
I decided not to work in a large institution ever, and he persuaded me that there was, like I've said. So that's important. The second thing is he tried. He tried very hard, and he had barbecues in a prison yard, maximum security prison wing, at which Sue was invited, and she didn't sign the efficiency contract, anything.
well, I'll describe that in there. I
And
mean, a
she
barbecue is rather a
And she got to
Euphemism.
know. She got to know significant people, significant prisoners on first name terms, and I must tell a wonderful story. She gets to know them there, and then the one time I was hit in the prison was again to do with the hospital, you see, because I'm out of my normal surroundings and the consent doesn't obviously apply. So I went to see this chap in the hospital wing, and he was hallucinating 2-foot-sized images of his dad coming through the wall. So the officer said, we can't understand he's sleeping on the floor. There's these 2 bunks and he's sleeping on the floor. And that he was saying, so I started talking about his dad. And instead of saying, I don't want to talk about my father now, he punched me. Boom. Not hard, but just to stop me. So I went out, and the officer was very good. They said, "Do you want to prosecute? I said, "No, I should have read the situation. That it's my fault." So this one particular chap, who he was a lovely lad in many ways, and as I say,
I call him the baby of the wing in there,
yes.
which he
and
was.
then later we moved to York. A number of different reasons. And Sue is visiting the prison with a group of Quakers from the Quaker meeting. And they say, no, when you go in there, no first name terms, no hugging, no stuffing, no, don't exchange any personal views. So all the visitors are on this side of the room, and they wheel the prisoners along here. Up jumps one of the prisoners, rushes across, hugs Sue, and says, "My psychiatrist's wife." Now this is a psychopath. No empathy, no sympathy, no. And And then he says, I'll let Sue take it after a bit, I'm awfully sorry I hit Bob. I hope he didn't.
No, he said, will Bob forgive me?
Oh,
And this, and he'd been waiting for years and years
wow.
for an opportunity, because after we left Parker's, Bob wasn't allowed to contact any of them.
Just... And he said, Sue said to him, no, Bob said it was his fault. Which it was. I've just said it was. I mean, you go in a situation and you ask a loaded question.
I must say, I didn't like it when you came home and this was all swollen.
It wasn't that to hurt me in a sense. I mean,
it could have been a lot worse, obviously.
But,
but it still didn't
he wanted
look
to
nice.
make a point. But I mean, he was saying physically, I don't want to talk about my dad. And he couldn't verbalise that. And I shouldn't have, but as I say, again, looking back, it was the fact that it was in the hospital outside my normal territory where I wasn't, I could empower them with a consent on the other, and they wouldn't have come through the door.
So far then, I am familiar with your method, and you've talked about serial killers and killers. But let's add a bit more complexity to this then, because you're talking about the killing a parental figment. What about people who kill kids, like Ian Brady, John Venables, a kid who kills an even younger kid?
All that be.
How would you, if you were in front of those people, how would you handle that situation? Is it the same technique, or is there something extra going on for them to be killing children?
This opens a lovely area, a very critical area. Once the frontal lobes are blocked, the normal thinking processes are also blocked. They can function perfectly adequately everywhere else. Comes into the area of concern, the box, as I've called it. And that could be anything. And it could come out in any way because you're not thinking straight. So Lucy Letby, for example, is killing babies. Now, how does this work? Well, the reasoning has gone, and I haven't spoken to, obviously, but what I would look for is something like, I'm saving them from worse, or some other such nonsense. It's non-thinking. It's acting because there's a drive, there's the fear, there's the hate, there's the anger against the parental figment, but it's coming out in any number of, an infinite number of names. Human beings are very imaginative, and it can come out in any different way. So don't be confused by what actually the abnormality is. Don't be confused by how the violence comes out. I mean, Hitler, for example, comes out in slaughtering Jews. How does that help? It doesn't, but he's got it in his head that I mean, his child was absolutely, I would go into this in the book, his child is absolutely appalling. And he's got lots of hatred, which he focuses on the Jews. And there's some talk about his grandparents being actually Jewish, and so there may be a connection there. But that's not relevant. The mistake to make is to look at the symptom to see what's wrong. No, you look at the fact that the frontal lobes are blocked. What's blocking them, which they're not telling you and they're not telling themselves. So they don't know why the frontal lobes are blocked. They're just driven to do it.
And that's a specific area that you can actually see on brain scans.
Yeah.
So if the box is opened, if they're at that point, do they unblock?
Yeah.
And you can see that on a scan?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I detected it clinically. I could see that she couldn't think, and that later she could think. And then I've told you this other story of the woman who turns to me unblocked and then blocked. You know, you can see it. The thought processes are frozen. They're cancelled. They're paralyzed. So in 1995, a doctor called Dr. Bessel van der Kolk in Massachusetts did some brain scanning work. He calls it the first brain scan works on people with trauma. So he puts them in a brain scan machine and he plays a tape of music, everything's fine. Plays a tape of the trauma, the gunshot, the car crash, whatever it is, and the frontal lobes stop working. The speech center stops working. It's as if, he says, that they have a stroke. It's as if they've had a stroke. And he calls it speechless terror. Now, he detected that in 1995. And that's objective, it's scientific, it's reproducible. Anybody can do that. Anybody, and there's a possibility that we may be able to repeat this. And I wanted to do that when I worked at Ashworth. And I arranged with Manchester University to bring a mobile MRI machine into the prison. I got permission to do it. And then the doctors again cut me off. But what it shows is there's neurological evidence for the model I'm using. There's neurological evidence that if the person starts thinking, or as he says, recalling the trauma, their frontal lobes go off. And they can't tell you about it. And because they can't tell you or themselves, it stays. With the axe lady, the axe is still there. And I'm arguing with her that it isn't. And if I can persuade her that it isn't, the frontal lobes start working again.
So that's a form of neuroplasticity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's a reaction. So frontal lobes work perfectly well. She was a very competent woman, this woman. She worked for the bankruptcy service and this sort of stuff, and so she worked very hard and very intellectually, and it worked brilliantly. But there's areas of her life where it didn't. And this is the same with Robert Maudsley, for example. He's a very cultured man. He loves Schubert like I do. And he's a very intelligent man. And one of the things I say about Maudsley is, fine, you've murdered somebody, you must pay. And I would employ Maudsley at a high salary because he's got a good brain to that, and he must pay £10,000 a year to each family who's you've deprived a member of, or whatever. Not lock him up, costing the state £500,000 a year, whatever it is. It's ludicrous. He needs to pay compensation for what he's done. And I'm sure had I been able to continue, he would have done that.
So do you get serial killers to the point where they will show remorse?
It just doesn't arise.
It doesn't arise.
The fact is, they regret. That's the wrong criteria people use, but it's the wrong criteria. I want them to understand why they did it in terms that I understand.
Yeah.
That's remorse is the icing on the cake. It doesn't matter. They regret doing it, and they won't do it again. That's what I'm after.
Yes.
That's what I'm after. Do you know why you did it? No. Well, then I'm going to keep you here until you do know why. Do you know why you did it? Yes, I did. Yes. My father threw my mother downstairs when I was 4, and I haven't forgiven him. I said, well, that's a long time ago. That's 20 years ago now, isn't it? Yes. Do you accept that? Yes. And if he accepts it, so again, the idea of remorse and is it there or not is a halfway house. It's the best you can do, or a quarter-way house. It's much better to say, why did you do it? Tell me why you did it. Oh, you just had it coming. No, that's not good enough. I want to know precisely why, and I want to have evidence that the frontal lobes are now back in working order, as they are with everything else. His frontal lobes work perfectly well at planning murder. It's just that the drive to plan it, as he says in his first interview, there's nothing wrong with killing, is what he told me. And there's a lot wrong with killing. I think killing people is a disease. It's a medical disease. And he needs to be able to undo that. And that is what matters. It's a medical cure, not remorse. Remorse is flim-flam. I want something solid. I want him to explain why he killed. He understands in the same terms I understand why he killed. He has to repeat my model to me and own it. He has to have agency for it. He has to understand where it's coming from, what it's doing, and how to get rid of it. So that when, in later occasions, somebody imitates or brings back a picture of his dad, shall we say, he can recognize this and say, well, no. I mean, what I do in right across the psychiatric spectrum is to say, I'm 75, not 3. You can't do that to me anymore. And that works beautifully. Once you get to the stage, they can say, well, no, that doesn't affect me anymore. Like Lenny says. I said, your mother's coming to hit you. What are you going to just told you? You can't hit me, Mum. I'm an adult. I'm twice your size. You can't do it. No block, no reaction, no instinct, no tantrum, nothing. Just the reality is, Mum, I'm bigger than you. It's over. Over, right? The fact it's no longer happening, because that's the other breakthrough, that the axe was falling all the time. With Alec, his dad is throwing his mother down all the time. It never stops. Why should it stop? So I say it stopped. Yeah, who are you? Yeah, oh, it stopped. And once it stopped, there's no longer any interest.
But, you know, once they've gone through that, they look at what they've done with a sort of immense sadness.
Oh, yes, that's true. Sadness.
And I think, and it's sort of like remorse plus. It's much more.
Yes,
much more.
True. I was just reacting to
see that video of Lenny explaining why he killed, and at the end of it he said, and I just battered him, he said, and he was just, you know, and I just kept doing it, and he just, the sadness in his voice, that, and the understanding that why this thing came over him. But there's a sort of relief. I feel that there's a relief for them in having an explanation, and owning an explanation for why this thing happened. Not an excuse. It's an explanation.
Because part of them doesn't
and the explanation is a relief for it should be a relief for society that we have got an explanation, so we can put in prevention, which, you know, it's looking after the kids, you know.
Because part of them does know. I mentioned Harold Shipman. He eventually did stupid things that to let the police know, to interfere. So there's part of him knows.
To stop it, but powerless to stop, a bit like an addict, I suppose.
Oh, definitely.
They know
that's the same,
it's not doing them any good, but they're doing it.
An addict takes drugs to block the frontal lobes even more. The same thing. I have to say about Sue and the videos, her description of the videos is the most acute I've ever had. She looks at them and she describes them in a way. I mean, that's true.
I know you and knew them. Yeah.
What I want to do is to hammer home the thing about trauma. I've invented something I call the trauma tetrad. That's a 4-point thing. Okay, with Lenny. So the first point is Lenny an adult? Yes. Can he tell his mother this? No. Should he be able to tell her? Yes. Does he know that his symptoms of violence come from his inability to tell his mother? No. But when he does, they go. That's the 4 points applied to Lenny. Now you apply them to Alec, right? 1. Was Alec's father wrong to throw his mother downstairs? Yes. Can he tell his father this? No. Should he be able to tell his father this? Yes. And did he know that all his symptoms of serial killing came from his inability to tell his father? No. But when he can, and when he did, they went. I mean, the idea that what happened a long time ago can still be having a devastating effect on you is a difficult concept to grasp. And it's easily mocked, it's easily thrown away. And far too many psychiatrists do that. And they're humiliated because they spend time with people not asking these penetrating questions, these subtle questions, these nuanced questions, and coming away with nothing. And they spend hours or years or whatever, work, and they still come back with the same stupidity, the same non-thinking, the same block.
Well, you called it frozen terror.
Yeah, because it's all speechless terror, frozen terror. You can see
your job is dissolving that.
Yes, but you can see if you don't have the tools or the insight. I didn't have the insight until 1986. I knew something was fishy. In fact, from a biographical point of view, I started in general practice in 1967, and in the early 1970s, I was offered a job teaching in the medical school in general practice. I said, no, I'm not moving. I need, there's something fishy going on here. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to stay here until I can sort it. Unfortunately, mind you, it was another 10 something years later. I had this particular person who was as dedicated to finding it as I was. And there's propitious circumstances, as I say, where I could see her without cost to her or reimbursement to me. So there was no financial gain in me extending it or stopping it or whatever, which is absolutely critical. Looking back, it's absolutely critical. And had there been a financial disincentive to her, she'd have thought, oh, well, I'm paying as well and we haven't got anywhere. But that wasn't the point. The point was we weren't getting anywhere because she couldn't get anywhere. She couldn't get anywhere. I knew it was something to do with childhood, just as Freud did. I knew it was something to do with childhoods. And here was a golden opportunity for working with somebody equally dedicated, powerful. She was a powerful person, equally dedicated. And I also knew that her father was dead. So she would say things like, oh, I can't blame him. Can't blame my dad. I said, what? He's dead. He can't do anything. So the logic of her inability to blame her dad today didn't add up. And that challenged me. I thought, well, there's something very fishy going on here. And as I said, we weren't getting anywhere, so I cut it down to half an hour. And we got even less far. And then I went back to her. I thought, well, she must have thought, well, this chap's not going away. He's not. And something like that. And also the fact that I can remember the decision now, going back to now, and I've still got all this medical computing and research to do. But you want to try? Yeah, okay, well, then stick with it. And the fact that I came back after that must have made all the difference. And then she came out with it. Now, once she comes out with it, I go, bang.
Yeah.
Not the fact that he threatened her life with a hatch. The fact that she couldn't tell me. I mean, she was working hard with me for those 9 months. She was working hard. And I was asking questions, and she wanted to know. But she couldn't know. So you're into free will and are we machines and all this sort of stuff. Now, fortunately, I'd had a very good grounding in philosophy. And I had decided, actually in 1960, I had actually decided that intent or free will, an element of free will was, or agency I now call it, was perfectly justifiable scientifically. Because science works on the basis it's a clockwork universe. All you do is find out the causes and everything will be solved. The one solution fits all. No, quite. And there are various philosophical arguments against that, particularly Hume's skepticism and Immanuel Kant's problems with epistemology, the structure of knowledge. And that convinced me that it's perfectly legitimate to talk about intent. Scientifically, you can talk about intent. It's subjective, you see, and everything has to be objective in science. But this is an element of subjectivity which is actually fundamental. And I recently wrote a whole series of philosophy papers on this, which I've listed in the book, 10 in all, with the Philosophy Journal in China. And I've gradually developed the theory, the model, such that it includes Hitler's childhood and Hitler's changes. But the crucial thing is that you sit down with somebody and they've got an intent. They may be twisted, they may be going the wrong way, they may be upside down, the wrong way backwards, but they've got an intent and they want it to be straight. And you have to sell them a package which says, straighten this out and you'll be able to think straight. Really?
I like one of your earlier aphorisms, which was parenting keeps infants alive, but adults insane.
It's true. Because you go through life saying, is this
Yeah.
all right? Is this all right? Looking over your shoulder all the time. No,
Yeah.
you're an adult now. And the parent's got two obligations. Anybody who's got recently a small baby, I should learn it. You've got two obligations. Bring the child up and bring the child up to be independent. Now, that's very difficult if you haven't been brought up independent yourself. And a lot of parental anxieties, and some of them are perfectly justified, come down through the child. So the phrase that answers that is, it takes a village to bring up a child. And with industrialization, a lot of villages have disappeared. So you're brought up in a tower block and you don't meet other people. You don't meet parental allies who have a different view of the world and of you. And that's what you need. So childhoods are important.
Is there a tipping point with childhood trauma that eradicates empathy for the rest of someone's life? Can that happen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But the child, I've spoken to, I don't know, 50,000 childhoods over the years or whatever. The child says, this is the end of me. I'm not going to get through in the next 2 minutes. It could be totally wrong, could be totally fictitious, but if the child sees that, and people have got different thresholds, and sometimes it's quite obvious, and sometimes it's verbal, I'm going to kill you when I get home, and all this sort of stuff. It's the threat to life powerful enough to breach what the child can do. Again, it's agency. Can I do anything to get out of this situation? No. He's much bigger than you, and you're in trouble. That varies right across. You can't say such and such will affect this person this particular way. You can't do that. But it's like a leg. You fall over, and somebody's got a weak leg and it breaks. Somebody's got a strong leg, it doesn't break. So maybe the same trauma for different people has a different impact, different
some
outcome.
people are picked up and some people aren't.
Yeah, but also some people, maybe it's just a sneer. I've got this incredible photograph. I don't know if this is germane, but I've got an incredible photograph of Donald Trump, aged 18. And his father's sneering at him. Bit bigger.
But
His father's sneering at him for the rest of his life. And that's what's trouble now.
You see, I've got this sort of picture of the men, as it were, and I think a lot of them were sort of born into concentration camps. You can imagine if you're born into a concentration camp, you're not going to trust anybody with anything.
Particularly the guards, particularly with people with authority.
Is the shutting down of the empathy, is that a protection mechanism?
It doesn't arise. Everybody's dangerous. Everybody's going to get you. The only way is to hit them first. And empathy is for the birds. I mean, it just isn't available. And if I can tell you what Alex said, when he really got hold of it, he said, when you're 4, when you have a tantrum, you stamp your foot on the floor. When you're 24 and have a tantrum, somebody dies. And then again, he was a very insightful young man, despite his discrepancy. He said, I got married when I was 18. I had everything I wanted. Meals cooked, everything available, laundry done, everything. Everything was fantastic. But I could only talk with my fists. So in order to do that, in order to say that, he's now learned to talk with his tongue. And he can see with great regret, obviously, what he did before. And I'm sure that's what happens. That's what we're talking about. His parents, particularly his dad, had taught him that human beings are violent and you talk with your fists. You don't talk motions, very weak and sloppy and all that sort of stuff. And that's how he summarized it. I could only talk with my fists. And I mean, that's the human tragedy.
What's the relationship between psychopathy and narcissism?
They're confusion in terms.
Okay.
There's a whole string of lunatic terms which mean sod all I was going to say.
I mean, nasty behaviours.
They don't, I mean, and the same with personality disorder and sociopaths, and they're all invented labels by frustrated lexicographers. That people they try very hard and they make no progress.
Well,
so they say, well, it's the patient's fault. They make wonderful classifications. The whole of the DSM-4, the DSM-5 as it is now, the psychotherapy is crap.
It's a classification of nastiness, really.
And it's not. It's
And the
not helpful.
medicalisation of it.
It's not
medicalising it.
No, it's not even medicalising it. It's codifying it in a view, which is you can do nothing about it. These are symptoms people have, so therefore it's a brain change. It's a chemical change. It isn't. It isn't. It's a trauma. Human beings are born lovable. They're born talking. They're born mingling. Their minds mingle. That's what it was. The phrase is their minds mingle, and they mingle because that's what they're for. I mean, I like talking to you. Why? Because you talk to me and I talk to you, and we compare notes, and we have different views, and I enjoy it. It's a delight because that's what the mind is for. Is to verbalize complex issues, sort them out, comment on this, comment on that, and you're merging them. And that is what life is about. Now, you try and codify that and say, well, you can't do it because you're psychopathic, you're lacking empathy, you're no remorse. You're missing the point.
Well, it's just an observation. It's just observational.
It's just descriptive. It isn't an analytic. It isn't therapeutic. It isn't a diagnosis. A diagnosis in medical terms should give you a clue what's gone wrong and what to do about it. Now, diagnosis in the current psychiatric terms is entirely descriptive. Now you've been depressed. Have you been depressed 6 months or 12 months? Oh, good, 12 months. Crap. Absolute crap.
Have some meds.
Before you leave.
Yeah.
What is it? It was a wonderful description. Psychiatrists call them prescription jockeys. Yes. You go in there and they're mixing the things, and they say, didn't it work? Oh, double the dose. Oh, it didn't. And that was the thing with ECT, shock treatment. The first series didn't help, so you give them some more. And you give them so many, it damages the brain.
Why are most serial killers male?
They aren't all.
But most are.
They aren't all, and it depends on your definition of serial killers. I mean, you can call Lucy Letby a serial killer. Yeah. She was a serial baby killer. And one of the podcasts we saw of yours, she's in for a terrible time in the prison, which is a reflection on the prison service. She should not have jungle justice. But anyway, so the reason behind your question about men is a lot to do with the socializing. Okay, little girls play with dollies and little boys play with tanks. What? Rubbish. I mean, it's socially determined, and that's it. And little boys hit harder than little girls, of course, and that's all wrong. It's wrong. You should bring up the child not to hit anybody or not to be violent. And you want to bring the child up to talk with their tongue, not with their fists. And little boys are encouraged to fist. They do boxing and all this kind of stuff. And you get a lot of problems from bullying. Bullying in nursery school, bullying in primary school. Very, very, very dangerous. Long-term effects of that. I was bullied at school. You hear it all the time. And what do? They give up. Cut off. Can't do anything about it, which they can't at that age. They learn, I can't do anything about it. They learn non-agency. They learn impotence. And my task, or our task, or the task is to empower them. Say, oh yes, that was terrible, but you can do something about it now. You can say things now that you couldn't say then. I mean, that's why Lenny is so beautiful, because you say, everybody can see that he's an adult, but he cannot say, hello, mother, I'm an adult. Now, what's going on? You can see it on the video. his frontal lobes. I'm speechless, but not with terror. Speechless with frustration. I mean, it's obvious. Now, in order to get then into that position, I should say, I saw him 4 or 5 times before I was allowed to video, before I was allowed to bring my camera in. I started work in prison July the 1st, and this is September the 11th. And there's a lovely little story about that. So I'm in the prison, and John Marriott's my friend, and so on and so forth. And John, being a little bit of a bombastic, has agreed to give a talk to the forthcoming prisoner governors conference. And he's terrified. So he says to me, he said, can we do a joint presentation, Bob? Can we? So I'm talkative. Can we? I said, well, I'm sorry, John. In order to do that, I have to have a video camera. Right. Sign the chit, bring the camera in, bring the tapes in, pass all the security and everything, and start videotaping. And once you've got it, of course, that's permission. And so July the 1st I start, it was a Monday, and then September the 11th I take me video in, and in the morning, as it says in the video, I say to Lenny, all right, if I videotape him, talk about trouble with parenting and stuff like that, and I start off in the video. So how would you explain to other people what we're talking about and why? And he's straight in there. Because I've had 3 or 4 sessions before tuning him in. And in it, he says, if you'd call yourself Dr. Johnson, I wouldn't have had naught to do with you. Because you're on this equal level. Otherwise, you're parental. Well, you're a naughty little boy, you see, so just behave yourself. Shuts them off like that. And if you're not careful and you're a parental figment, then you're in trouble, because that's who they tend to get angry with, shall we say. And that's really what happened with Freud, if I can go into that a bit.
Yeah.
Freud said, transfer onto me your parental feelings. Right. And if I'd done that in prison, I wouldn't have lasted very long. No. And the other thing about Freud is, in 1900, he writes in The Interpretation of Dreams, an incident with his father, who was quite a irascible man. And he's 7 or 8. He recalls when he was 7 or 8. And he goes into his parents' bedroom and pisses in the pot. And his father shrieks and said, the boy will come to nothing. Oh! And you can see Freud's pen's digging into the paper as he says this. Now that's in 1900, when he's 41. And when he's 89 or something, in 1937, he's writing about Moses and monotheism. And he says, well, we're actually talking about fathers here. You may trust them, but you will always be afraid of them. So if you had a problem with fear of dad and you went to see a Freudian, you'd get nowhere. And I was frightened of my father, no question. He had a very bad temper, a temper. He was a very upright man in many ways. Now, there's a lot of good things from him, but he had a temper. And looking back, I was frightened of him until I was 49 in 1986. And I was able then to allow the person in front of me to express fear of her father. Before that, I'm quite sure, I've recorded sessions way back to the early 60s, and I'm sure anger you're allowed. I wrote a thesis on anger. But fear, I'm sure they started saying, no, we won't talk about it. No. I would have stopped them.
So you had to open your own box.
It had to be opened already without anybody. Otherwise, I wouldn't have allowed it. I'm quite sure. It's dangerous. Yeah. A frightening parent is in charge of your life. That's the point. The parent is your life support system until you look after yourself. And that's why what the parent has to do is to wean them physically, emotionally, and otherwise. And assure them that they can live on their own. And it's not always easy. It's not easy because parents get very anxious and they hang on. That could happen to you. I want to do so. I can do it for you. I can do it. Fine. That's not the answer. The answer is they have to learn themselves. They have to learn to toddle. That's the toddling metaphor. They have to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, all right across. You can't stand on their feet for them. They have to do that themselves. And you can easily do whatever you've learned to do, but they have to learn to do it. And that's what a doctor has to do. That's what I had to do in the prison. I wasn't frightened of their dad. Up until so I was 49, I probably was. So I couldn't discuss there, and I wouldn't have gone into the prison. I wouldn't have gone into the prison, and it would have been dangerous for me to go into the prison. But once I knew that there was no need to be frightened of dads or mums, I mean, whichever, it doesn't matter which it is. And because what I learned was that the infant is gender neutral. Despite what Freud said, the infant is gender neutral. One of the parents is usually the dominant one, but it doesn't matter. The gender is of no consequence to the infant. The infant wants to know, are they being fed? Are they going to be looked after? Are they kept warm? Are they going to be loved? Are they going to be given affection and support? And if they're not, then they have to make do, and they make up a whole series of things which drive them. I mean, just to go back to the political one of Trump's recent rallies, he said, "I've never had this much support in my life." That's true, and he isn't getting it now because he's looking for parental type of support. He doesn't call it that, and if you suggested that, he would lock you up or whatever he would do. But that's the bottom of it.
So why do you think there are so many male killers?
Well, I do think we are a particularly gendered society, and there's expectations of men that are rather different from expectations of women. But I was thinking also that we're an incredibly coercive society. That the assumption behind all the legislations that's tumbling out constantly is that people won't behave themselves unless there's a big stick behind them. And that is so wrong. And I think that feeds into a particular type of toxic masculinity which goes round with big sticks. And I don't think our government processes are particularly good role models. So I would like a kinder society, and a society that trusts each other to be kind, and institutions where compassion and kindness is put at its heart, and that includes schools. I think schools have become very coercive places, not only for the students but also for the people that work there, the teachers. And there seems to be an assumption that experts are no longer needed. That they have to be controlled in some way, and they've got. If they do, I mean, I know most about the education profession and the health professions. So, in fact, agency is being taken away from teachers, and curriculums and protocols are being imposed. The same thing is happening in medicine. So doctors can't use their clinical judgments, and teachers can't use their compassion. So, I really would like a society that, that's kind and trusting.
And I mean,
our public services are being atomized and scattered and shattered, really. Yeah.
My mum quit as a teacher because of the bureaucratic strangulation. Do you think we're tiptoeing into Orwellian totalitarianism?
I hope not. I could write a dystopian novel about that, but I would like to.
It's a bit like what's happening in China. But just take Lucy Letby. The whole layer of managerial lunacy. Doctors trained medically, and they should make medical administrative decisions as they did when I was a medical student. Then it's part of the denigration of the national health system. Oh, they need managing. Oh, they save money. Wrong. The doctors know what the health service should do. And Letby is a case in point. They said, just a minute, this is going to, no, our reputation, our commercial interest. What? It's absolute garbage. And I want to mention the recent article in The Economist, because this is really remarkable. It came out on the 26th of June, 2023. And I've summarized it here. And basically, I've taken the figures from there. And they say that each prisoner costs us all £50,000 each and every year. So if you add another 100 prisoners, that's 5 million extra every year. And guess what? The plans the government has is for 100,000 prisoners shortly, with no extra funding. Talking about, building more prisons. Building more prisons, it's an expensive way of making things considerably worse.
Building more schools and hospitals.
And then I want to know why crime, why antisocial behavior, why violence, why murder. So taking the data from that article, half of all thefts, which includes burglaries, muggings, shoplifting, car break-ins, are carried out by people who are addicted to drugs. They're funding the habit. Drug addiction, any addiction, is a medical disease. It is treatable, and I would say it is curable. What you have to do, drug users have given up. Well, the frontal lobes aren't working, and they're getting in a mess, so they make them work even less well by dosing themselves. They need emotional support on the ground, but trustworthy people, so they have a better future. Look, laddie, if you stopped drugging yourself, you could do all these fantastic intellectual things. And drugs in prisons are appalling. They're just.
It's the only way to survive, isn't it?
So then the next thing is what I've called orphans, right? Mothers have to feed their children. So poverty comes in here. So when mothers are locked up for petty crimes, now The Economist counts 17,000 orphans every year. Every year, this is government policy. Lock them up. Lock them up. Rubbish. It's antisocial behaviour. Right.
Well, it's the opposite of sensible, for apart from anything else.
Now, the other fact that hit me from that article was a quarter of all prisoners have been in care. Right. So you have a hospital, and a quarter of all people have got tuberculosis. Right. And you find that the people with tuberculosis have been to this particular school or particular context. You don't take notice. You don't bother. What? That's medical negligence. You want to stop tuberculosis, you go to the source of the tuberculosis. Here you have a quarter of the people have been orphaned, been childcare. Why doesn't that register? And I'll tell you something else. That's the quarter you know about. There's 3/4 who aren't telling themselves and not telling any reports. Oh, yes, I had a lovely childhood. Yes, well, of course, my father me because that showed he loved me. You hear this? It's absolute crap. So, what I want is reform. And according to this article again, polls show that voters are not as keen on imprisonment as governments. That's the first thing.
Good.
That's right. And they also say that a trauma-informed criminal justice system works. So, Sean, what we want is an undertaking that this will produce a trauma-informed criminal justice system, because I'm not going to rest until it does.
That is what we are campaigning for, and that's why your work dovetails nicely with our mission statement, which is to end the war on drugs, end mass incarceration, low-level drug users referred to mental health. Look at what they do with Portugal with the heroin users, got them down to record lows. And prisons, more Dr. Bobs required, definitely. Yes. We're almost at 2 hours. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers who've been with us on this journey?
I just have to take that last point. I came up to Manchester 3 years ago for a webinar organised by Edwina Grosvenor on one small thing. She'd done a lot of work in prisons. And there were feedback from the webinar, and they said, more Dr. Bobs in the prisons. And I mean, it's a totally different way of looking at what is a scary thing. Your house is broken into, your car is broken into, very traumatic, very painful, and a lot of anger. Oh, yes, I know. I wanted to show the viewers this. There's this book, You Will Not Have My Hate, and there's another book, I Shall Not Hate. The second book, his 3 gorgeous daughters and his niece died in their bedroom when an Israeli army shell exploded in it.
Oh, my goodness.
And he writes that.
Wow, forgiveness.
Because he says that hate and revenge are cyclical. They go round and round. And this book, You Will Not Have My Hate, is written by a Parisian. His wife went out to for a nightclub that was shot down by the Islamic terrorists. You will not have my hate. So these two show, well, are you going to say, well, they're not thinking straight, or they're weak, or they're cowardly? No, these people have arrived. These people have got back to what I think is a lovable, sociable, non-violent status. And this is what human beings potentially are. So these people are ahead of the game. They're doing what I talk about. And what inspires me, and what I did in the prison, what I was aiming for in the prison, and the fact that they can do it shows it can be done.
So, do you want to hold up those 2 books and just let the viewers know the gist and why they should check them out?
Yeah, this is my book. It's really the backstory to our adventures when we went down to the Isle of Wight and Bob started working in the prison. And it shows my reactions and my feelings to what was going on there and what was happening to us. We ended up actually in the High Court being prosecuted because Bob was letting prisoners' faces be shown on television. But that's part of the story.
And for people who are just listening to this on audio, it's called The Prison Psychiatrist's Wife by Sue Johnson.
And there's a foreword by Charlie Bronson, who I feature in the book. Yes. So it's a good read. It makes people cry, I think.
Oh.
But yeah.
And you've got next to that.
Oh no, that's my notebook.
Okay.
But that's Bob's book.
Yeah.
Bob's latest book, should I say?
Because the publisher was publishing that, and we were discussing it on a Zoom. I said, "How about looking at a proposal of mine?" He said, "Oh, all right then." And then he agreed to publish it. And here it is. Friendless Childhoods Explain War. And the picture shows here a crushed child thinking tanks. Now, I can guarantee to you that no warmonger had a secure childhood. And that real warriors, I mean, I quote Hitler's description of his own childhood, and it's absolutely diabolic. The real worry is that Putin's childhood was rocky. Xi Jinping's childhood was appalling. I must tell you a little story about Xi Jinping. When he was 14, he was the wrong side of the Cultural Revolution. So they put on a very heavy dunce's cap, metal one, with "This man is a traitor to the state." The room is full of people jeering and throwing insults at him, and his mother's in there. So they send him to a remand home, a secure institution. And he breaks out, because he's a clever lad. Runs home through the rain, comes in. "Mom, I'm cold, I'm wet, I'm hungry." So she sends for the police. Thank you. So inside, there is an explosion. So what do you find him doing? You find him controlling the Chinese nation. Any conceivable insults to Xi Jinping's thought or Xi Jinping, brutally suppressed. He's going to invade Taiwan because his figments tell him to control. And the really worrying thing is that Hitler, in his bunker, before he shoots himself, turns on the German people, castigates them, and had he had a nuclear button, he would have pressed it. So if that doesn't worry you,
Good grief.
something's wrong.
Wow, what an absolutely fascinating interview. So please check out the books. Are you guys available on socials?
Bob has.
I've got a Substack page.
Okay.
Substack, Dr. Bob Johnson.
Yeah.
Find that.
We'll
And
put
this
that down
is
there.
this is the book that I wrote for a workshop in Denmark, and you see it's called Verbal Physiotherapy, which ties in with having a stroke, but it's a verbal stroke. And if you have a stroke in your arm, and the physiotherapist says, you can do it, I can't. Good Lord. And you keep at it, you can do it. And that's exactly what happens with the verbs. Hello, mother, I'm an adult. Do you believe that? I will do. And they get stronger. So it's verbal physiotherapy. So the place I write most and you can comment on most is the Substack page.
Okay.
That's
I have an
Substack.
Instagram which I have to start using now. I think I've put
Substack
one
Dr.
picture
Bob
of this
Johnson.
up, but I don't think I've put a picture of myself up even yet.
Oh, well, huge thank you for coming on, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as me. Please put your comments below the video. Let us know what you think. And please check out the books and support this important work. And huge thank you again. Cheers.
I just want to say, Shaun, this has really been a wonderful experience. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Fantastic.